Hi everyone, I'm Max Braden. Now, reading doesn't seem like the most fun thing in the world, but maybe you just haven't found the right book yet. I'm here to talk to you today about Ambassador, a really cool sci-fi novel written for kids by William Alexander. In the story, the young boy Gabe Fuentes is chosen by a purple blob from outer space called the Envoy to become the ambassador for Earth. Gabe has to travel to the center of the galaxy to talk with other alien ambassadors and prevent terrible things from happening that could spell danger for the entire galaxy. In this video, I want to discuss the importance of authenticity in children's literature. Specifically, I want to talk about how important it is for children's literature to have authentic, accurate, and positive portrayals of all kinds of ethnic groups. Ambassador does this very well. The author, William Alexander, is Cuban American, just like Gabe is of Mexican descent. The common Hispanic and Latino backgrounds make it easy for the author to create an authentic Hispanic protagonist who doesn't perpetuate any stereotypes, which is really good. But before I can talk about how Ambassador is an authentic Hispanic children's novel, I wanted to talk about the situation of Hispanics in literature in the past and in the present. It's not exactly the happiest thing to talk about, but it's important to know so you can understand why Ambassador is rather remarkable in its portrayal of Hispanic people. First off, there's not a lot of children's literature out there for ethnic minorities in America, especially Hispanics, and that's definitely not good. Arlene L. Berry, who teaches at the University of Kansas, wrote an academic article back in 1998 about this problem. Although the problem has likely mitigated somewhat since then, it's still a problem regardless. Berry's article is titled Hispanic Representation in Literature for Children and Young Adults. Berry states that Hispanics are the highest growing population in the United States right now, and because of that, there's an increasing need for children's literature that features more Hispanic characters and experiences. If that need is not met and, I quote, if information and materials from school have no relevance to the culture at home, students do not see the importance of education, this lack of curricular representation may, indeed, be disastrous. You can see page 632 of the article for more information. Like Gabe Fuentes himself, many non-white children are sort of torn between worlds. There's the one at school where most kids are white, and the one at home where the family may not be. This is especially the case for Hispanic children whose parents may speak some form of Spanish. But this lack of culturally relevant material in school has serious consequences. Berry even states on page 636 of the article that Hispanic dropout rates are double those of non-Hispanics. And Hispanic children's level of reading skills is 2 years behind that of their white peers. Wow. Clearly, there needs to be more culturally relevant books for Hispanic children to read, whether in school or just in general. But even that may not be enough. Yeah, it gets worse. I'm just raining down all sorts of negative information on you. I never said it made me happy, but it's important to know. There are a number of books written for Hispanic children out there, but it's not just the low quantity of books that matters. It's the quality and authenticity of them as well. There's an academic article out there by Carmen M. Martinez-Roldan, a professor at the Bilingual Bicultural Education Program at Columbia University in New York. Martinez-Roldan argues in the introduction on page 5 that many of the children's books published for Hispanics don't promote cultural understanding and avoid stereotypes. She spends a lot of the article examining the children's book Skippy John Jones in the Doghouse, which features a Siamese cat as its protagonist and also has 80 instances of Spanish word use. You can see page 6 of the article. Because this book in particular has a lot of Spanish word use, Martinez-Roldan analyzes it specifically because, as she says on page 7, language can have derogatory connotations and loaded words that carry insulting overtones because of the context in which they appear. She finds the portrayal of the Chihuahuas in the story is racist because they follow Mexican stereotypes. There's various words and phrases such as cockeyed and holy guacamole. She lists them on page 10. A lot of these words and phrases, make these characters seem crazy, drunk, and superficial, rather than fully fleshed out characters who don't fall prey to Mexican stereotypes. As Martinez Roldan puts it on page 13, sources of negative perceptions of Hispanics and Latinos are quite prevalent, even with such a relatively small set of stories about them written for children. So there's not only a lack of literature for Hispanic children, but a lack of good literature that features characters with authentic, non-stereotypical Hispanic backgrounds and experiences. Yeah, it's not good to hear. But now I can get into the good news. Ambassador by William Alexander is a very entertaining story that does have characters with authentic, non-stereotypical Hispanic backgrounds and experiences. It's authentic because it's, like I said, it's written by a Cuban American and it's written for a young audience. So this story in general is not just educational and empowering for minorities, but for all children in general. Because you've got this kid basically talking to aliens and preventing us all from dying. Like, how is that not awesome? It's not just one more book about the Hispanic children's experience. It adds more depth and it sheds a positive light on it. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I want to briefly mention an academic article written by Eliza G. Braden and Sanjuana C. Rodriguez titled Beyond Mirrors and Windows. Like Barry, Braden and Rodriguez acknowledge the growth of the Latino population in North America, United States of America, and thus the growing importance of including culturally relevant and representative texts. The authors uncover a number of trends prevalent throughout 57 selected books written for Hispanic and Latino children. And Ambassador defies many of those trends, which tend to be a little bit negative and disheartening. Okay, so it doesn't defy all of them, but for one thing, it's still written primarily in English. The authors discovered that English is the language used the most in these books that they analyzed, and that when Spanish is used, it's simply to add cultural flavor to the text, which is on page 63. Remember that this is how it was with Skippy John Jones, and Ambassador hardly has any Spanish in it at all. Braden and Rodriguez also determined that many cultural nuances placed in the text were superficial, again, like with Skippy John Jones. However, nothing is superficial about Gabe Fuentes and his family. On pages 22 and 23 of Ambassador, it's explained how Gabe's parents met and how they're both from Guadalajara, Mexico, but they didn't meet each other until they both ended up in India doing very different things. They end up married before traveling to the United States. It's later explained that Gabe's mom had a work visa, but his father never did, because he figured that they were nomads in some other part of the world, which is on pages 86 through 87 of Ambassador. This is not the typical Mexican-American experience, but then again, the idea of Mexicans jumping the border to the States is a very stereotypical one that is still a big issue today. The amount of backstory and cultural blending in Gabe's family makes Ambassador feel anything but superficial in its portrayal of Hispanics or Mexicans. Also, the Hispanic characters don't really seem confined to traditional gender roles, which was a trend uncovered in Hispanic literature, like I mentioned earlier. Many of the stories Braden and Rodriguez looked at placed mothers in the role of homemaker and primary caregiver. This is detailed on page 66 of that paper. This isn't necessarily bad, but seeing diversity in how different genders are portrayed might be better for children's literature today. In Ambassador, Gabe's dad spends a lot of time at home cooking, though he does work in restaurants too. Gabe's mother tutors on Thursdays, which is brought up very early on in pages 12 through 13. Lupe is Gabe's sister, and she's one of the more complicated characters in the story. She has a more violent temper than her younger brother, and isn't afraid to throw out swear words when she's angry, which, of course, doesn't seem at all like what you would expect due to gender stereotypes. Gabe is the one more prone to communicating quietly, while Lupe is more hot-headed. Traditional gender roles, for the most part, are rather non-existent in Ambassador. The last trend that was found in Hispanic children's literature is what the authors called a utopia. By that they mean that the immensely popular elements of a happy ending will come together at the conclusion. This is analyzed deeply on page 67. Basically, everything is all hunky-dory and wrapped up in a really predictable, simplistic way most of the time. But the authors did find a notable exception in a book titled I Dreamt, which covers difficult topics such as gang wars, bullies, and criminal activity. Not only did this book seem to cover very mature subject matter, which a number of Hispanic people may actually encounter on a frequent basis due to socioeconomic issues, but I Dreamt used poetic imagery a lot as a form of empowerment. It encourages kids to be resilient despite tragedy and insecurity, as stated on page 68. There are similar moments in Ambassador. The book is lighter in tone than I Dreamt, but it still tackles tough issues nevertheless. One of the most significant moments in the story is when Gabe meets his father at an immigration center and finds out that he's getting deported within 24 hours back to Mexico. His dad is clearly trying to be strong, but there's dejection in his face and voice. On pages 89 through 90, Gabe thinks to himself painfully how he can talk to aliens thousands of light years away, but he'll need to scramble for cash just to call his dad internationally. The chapter ends with Gabe beginning to get overtaken with grief and fear at his family's predicament. And by the end of the book, spoiler alert, Gabe still hasn't found a solution to it because the author is setting up the book like a cliffhanger. I think there's a sequel out there. Anyway, there's nothing cheesy or forced about any of it. This isn't like a lighthearted, simplistic, happily ever after moment. So this is already breaking a big trend. Gabe isn't sure how he's going to cope with the horror of losing his father, despite the life that his father's already set up for himself as a Mexican-American immigrant. There is no utopia. This complicated issue is addressed and handled in a mature and memorable way. And it's something that we see even right now. This sets Ambassador miles above other Hispanic children's literature. So, in this video, we talked about authenticity in children's literature, specifically Hispanic children's literature. I went over the situation and trends of Hispanic literature in the past and the present. We saw how there's been a low quantity of Hispanic children's literature and the kind of consequences that can have on Hispanic children in school and in growing up. We saw some of the negative portrayals and trends prevalent in the always fun. Google Play has it online. You can probably find it elsewhere. Hope you enjoyed this video.